So I thought I'd start this one with my little boo boy. He's a cutie, isn't he? I love him so much. Hi. Good boy. Off you go. So tonight's one, I think, I was tossing up two ideas of what I was going to talk about on this one. I was either tossing up kind of the history of Jack and I, or something that happened to my dad in 2014 that's really affected me ever since. And I've decided to go with what happened to my dad. So in the last video I made, I mentioned that I suffer from severe separation anxiety. When I was a kid, I had it, but most kids, when they're that little, do have some form of separation anxiety, especially if they have really good relationships with their parents. Mum and Dad tell me stories of how when I was little and in preschool and primary school, when they'd have to drop me off, they'd have to literally give me to the teacher and run away. And when I'd see them leaving, I'd like run to the gate and be like, they're crying, begging them to take me with them. I don't remember that too much. I kind of have a picture of it in my head, but it was 15 years ago. So Dad and I have always had a really good relationship ever since I was little. When I was 5, he started reading me the Harry Potter series and the Chronicles of Narnia, and for about 4 or 5 years, that was kind of the thing he and I would do, is he would put me into bed of a night and read me the stories until I was tired and would go to sleep. So that created a really strong bond between us. And around 2006 or 7, Dad started working for the funeral industry, and he worked with them until 2014. I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was in May 2014. Dad was working for a funeral company about 30 minutes away from home, and he got a call that they had to go and pick up a body. And this is retelling what he told me. One thing Dad always used to complain about is people dying in the worst spot possible. So dying in this cramped little bathroom, dying in the small bedroom, dying in the corner of the room where there's furniture all around you, just dying in really inconvenient places where it was difficult for them to get the person. Now this person, I believe, did that. They died in a really awkward position. According to Dad, this male was morbidly obese, and he had a friend with him, well, not friend, sorry, co-worker with him, and the two of them were put out on the call to go pick up the body. Now, the way Dad tells it is that he wanted to do the heavier end. They didn't have any kind of... It should have been, from the way he retells it to me, it should have been some sort of machine that picked up this person because they were so big, but they didn't have that. So him and his co-worker had to pick him up on the stretcher and carry him out. Dad decided to be at the head of the person, which I believe is the heavier, when you're carrying someone, that's the heavier end to carry them on. If I'm wrong, if it's not the head, wherever he was at the heavier end of the person. When he went to go and pick him up, he felt... I don't even remember how he described it. He felt like there was something wrong. There was something wrong with his heart. And now this is where I come into the story. I remember him going out on call, and I heard a knock at the door. It was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And I go and answer the door, and Dad is really breathless. And I jokingly go, "Oh, did you forget your keys?" And he goes, "Yes," and he kind of stumbles inside, and really breathlessly and confused, he goes, "It wasn't my wallet." And I didn't think much of it. I just thought he was tired. It was late at night. He'd just gone and had to pick up somebody. 14-year-old me didn't really think about it. He then went upstairs, and about 5 minutes later, I hear my sister come sprinting down the stairs, and she goes, Dad's having a heart attack. I need you to go and wait outside for the ambulance. And what happened that I wasn't there for is that Dad went upstairs, and his most famous line, we hate him saying this, was, "Now I don't want you to panic." But every time he says that, we go, oh my God, what has happened? So that's what he said to my mum, because she could see that there was something wrong. And he said, "Now I don't want you to panic, but I think I'm having a heart attack." And I joke about this now because I joke about this story because if I don't joke about it, I'm going to cry about it. I'm probably going to end up crying anyway. But I kind of throw in little jokes here and there because that's my way of dealing it. It happened coming up to 6 years ago, and we all joke about it as a family because to an extent he's okay now, but I'll get to that. So of course what he does, after complaining all those times about people dying in the worst spots ever, is he goes upstairs, goes into the bedroom, goes to his side of the bed, which is probably the skinniest part of the house. It's got no room next to it. You can barely kind of walk sideways. You kind of have to turn front on or back to the bed to walk past it because it's right next to a wall and a window. And he decided to lie on the bed and have his heart attacks. So yeah, Adrian comes sprinting downstairs, and I'm panicking because I've never experienced this before. I'm 14 years old. I don't know what's going on. And I asked, can I go upstairs and see him? And she went, no, you're not allowed to go upstairs. And I'm very grateful that my mum and my sister protected me from what was happening. My sister would have been 19 at the time, so my age now. And I'm very grateful that they didn't let me see what was happening, because what I did end up seeing has severely affected me since, but that's later again. So I went outside and we had to wait for the ambulances, and I was told to wait downstairs, and I kind of waited at the bottom of the stairs and I could hear them. And from what I remember, the first ambulance didn't have the right equipment. The second ambulance's equipment didn't work. And then we got the third ambulance. So he ended up having to go to the hospital, and this is where we really joke about it. He ended up having to go to the hospital 30 minutes away. That's literally right across the road from his work. Like, if you were to stand out the front of where he used to work at the funeral home, you could walk across to the hospital. So from him retelling it, is him and his co-worker got back to work, and the co-worker could see that there was something wrong, and Dad was like, no, I just want to get home, just get me home, I want to go home, because the co-worker had picked him up and they'd gone together, and then he dropped him home, from my recollection. And you know, that was the best way it could have happened. If the co-worker hadn't come and got Dad, and hadn't been the way it played out, things may have gotten worse, because, you know, I don't know how people drive when you're having a heart attack. I'm guessing not well. So yeah, Dad explains the reason why he wanted to come home so badly is because he wanted to see Mum and myself and my sister, because he thought he was dying. He wanted to see us and tell us he loved us before he died. And although we joke about how stupid can you get, you drive 30 minutes away from the hospital you end up going to, I kind of understand his mentality. He thought he was dying, and if he was going to die, the last thing he wanted to do was be with my mum and be with us. So they took him to the hospital, and I wasn't there for any of this. I was told I had to stay home. From my recollection of the story, there was this really amazing nurse at the hospital who refused to stop working on Dad. And from what I remember Mum telling me, she literally jumped on top of him, because Dad's not a small man, especially before the heart attacks. She had to jump on top of him on the gurney to be able to give him CPR, like chest compressions, to be able to put all her weight on him. And the people from the ambulance that night were amazing as well. Just all around really good. They all did whatever they could to save my dad. And so they got Dad into a semi-stable condition. By the time the night had ended, so it hit midnight, from my memory, he had had 6 heart attacks in one night. And then he had the 7th the next day. I think it was like early the next day. And the next day is when I went to go and see him. And I think the memory of how I saw him still really upsets me, as you can see. So I'm going to do my best not to disappear into a puddle of tears. We went to the hospital, and if you know hospitals, you know that when they kind of keep the most severe cases close to the nurse's desks. So he was literally in the room right in front of the nurse's station so they could look in at him. And we walked in, and he looked dead. He was alive, but he had absolutely no colour in his face. He could barely keep his eyes open, and he just looked absolutely dead. And I couldn't handle it. I still, that image still haunts me. Because, you know, Dad was so big and strong, you know, to see him look that frail and so close to death. And I know he's okay. I know it's a silly thing to get upset over, but just, So, since the initial 7 heart attacks, we call it his 7 heart attacks, he's had a couple little ones here and there. I think if you were to count all the little ones, he'd be over 10 or 11 by now. He's never been that bad again. I think he spent almost over a month, maybe close to 2 months in hospital. Because I know he was still there on Mother's Day. I think Mother's Day was like 2 weeks after, so I think he spent about a month there. He ended up getting fired from his job. I don't know much about that story. I just know that he got fired because obviously he couldn't come in and perform his duties. To me as a 14-year-old and even as a 19-year-old, who we don't kind of talk about that too much. So from what we have talked about, to me that seems really unfair and stupid. Like, someone gets injured at work and you fire them because they can't come back into work. But, you know, we don't talk about that because I know there were a lot of different issues with that. I think it got resolved eventually. But he hasn't gone back to work in the funeral industry. He has talked about it a couple times, and every time he talks about it, I kind of have a little, like, moment of, don't you freaking dare do that. Don't you dare go back into that kind of work. Even now, we've been renovating the house. We started the renovation, so he got better, or as better as he could, but he wasn't well enough to go back to work. But he was really bored at home. And so Mum started giving him little kind of projects to do around the house to keep him busy. And it started with doing up the garden out the back because it was absolutely horrible. No good whatsoever. So now we've got lovely garden beds. We've now got a fire pit, we've got a barley hut, we've got a deck. So in those 6 years since he had the heart attacks and Mum started getting him to do these projects, the backyard's completely changed. Like, you wouldn't recognise it, besides the colour of the fence, because we've kept the same fence, and probably the shed being in the same place. It looks completely different. There's nothing else that's the same. And we're doing the deck now. It's almost done. But even now, when he carries in really heavy things like timber, we all kind of get a little worried about him. Like, if he gets up on the scaffolding, to be able to put the timber up on top. Oh, I don't know the technical terms. He's told me this, but I'm not good with building. But yeah, so it's little things that gets us worried. He has to take like this spray thing whenever he starts having chest pains, and there's been a few times where he'll sit there and he'll clutch his chest and he'll look like he's in a lot of pain. And we'll go, are you okay? Take your spray. Are you feeling better? Do we need to call an ambulance? I'm kind of... Mum's very calm. Mum's very good. Adrian and my sister and I both are very quick to panic. I think I'm a little less so than her, but only like by a little bit. But yeah, as soon as he's like, oh, I think there's something wrong with my heart, my sister and I were like, oh, you need to go to a hospital. You're having another heart attack. You're dying. Whereas Mum's like, no, you're fine. Suck it up. I remember. I don't know if this was before or after the heart attacks, but Dad would complain about this really intense pain in his leg. And Mum would be like, oh, suck it up. You're fine. Go and mow the lawns. And it turned out he had was it a break or a fracture in one of his leg bones? And she was like, oh, well, how was I meant to know? So yeah, the reason this still severely affects me today is because I think it's what's triggered, and I hate using that word. I think like it's the appropriate word, but people have turned that word into almost a joke. So I really don't like using it, but I don't know any substitute that I feel is appropriate. But I get triggered. Yeah, it kind of triggered things, my separation anxiety, to a point where I've only just recently admitted this to my parents. And it's been something I've struggled with for the past 12 months. I don't know what I'm going to do when my parents die. My 2 dogs, who are... How old are you? 14? He can't answer me, but I think he's 14, turning 14 this year. My 2 dogs are turning 14. My sister's married and moved out. I have a few close friends, but the main reason I live, selfishly, is for Mum and Dad. And when I think about them dying, I don't know what I'm going to do. They're both older parents. Well, Dad's not too old, but I think the heart attacks have aged him. But, you know, they're both older parents. And I especially worry if I ever get married, what if Dad's not there? Because my sister got married in 2017, and in her wedding DVD, I always cry when I see Mum and Dad's reactions because I'm really scared that they're not going to be there for my wedding. Especially Dad, with all of his heart problems, because he's okay, but he still has a lot of problems. I'm very scared that he's not going to be there to walk me down the aisle and give me away, and he's not going to be there to do all that wedding stuff. And I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't have a family of my own. I don't know what I'm going to do when they die, because they're the main reason that I live. And when they die, I'm scared that that's when I'm going to kill myself, because I don't want to live in a world without them. And the idea of them, and I know everyone dies, and I know it's something you can't avoid, and I know there's people who've never met their parents because their parents have died at such a young age, but I'm so freaking scared of losing my parents that it keeps me up at night, that I cry myself to sleep because I'm just so scared of losing them. And I've told Mum this. I don't think I've told Dad, but I'm guessing that she's talked to him about it. But the idea of them not being around anymore really scares me. So, and I know it would be such a selfish thing to do, to kill myself and leave my sister behind. But she will have her own family. And if I don't have anyone else, I won't have any reason to live, because I love Mum and Dad so much, and if it wasn't for them, I'd be dead already. So I'm just really, really scared. And I don't know how to get over this anxiety that I have about them dying. I and I don't know if this is a normal feeling to have. I haven't talked about it with my therapist yet. So I don't know if this is a normal feeling to have. But just so much anxiety and fear of not having parents anymore. And I've told this story already, but when I think about when I tried to kill myself and Mum put her arms around me and said everything was gonna be okay. What if one day Mum's not there to do that and tell me everything's gonna be okay? I just don't know what I'd do in that case. And I know it's a very selfish thing to do and a very selfish thing to think about. But I just don't know what I'd do. They're the main reason that I'm still alive. I don't think I can talk anymore, so I'm gonna end this one here.